So here's a product and a video I'm pretty excited about. It's been almost 3 years since the original RetroTink 2X hit this channel, and at that time I was just a very tiny channel and Mike's device was relatively unknown to most people. I want to say it'd be another month or so before even another video would pop up, which was really cool for me because I was so small at the time, and I remain appreciative that Mike gave me the opportunity to break the news and review his first device. I was even fortunate enough to get the first ever RetroTink 2X off the line, signed by the mastermind himself. And while that device was fantastic at what it did, zero lag line doubling, it was really a stepping stone into the true revision, the RetroTink 2X Pro, which added a few new features, not the least of which were artificial scan lines and becoming firmware upgradable. The next product was the 2X multi-format, which touted 480p pass-through for newish consoles that could output progressive scan over component. And this was more of an alternative product as opposed to an upgrade to the Pro, kind of a fork in the road with different use cases. And after that multi-format came out, gamers still wanted more. There was this ongoing ask about a 3X because that seemed to be the next incremental leap. We're at 480p with the current devices, which are line doubling, so tripling the signal would get us into HD territory and get people to 720p. That was the wish of a lot of people. Well, today, not only is that a reality, Mike swung for the fence and has released the 5X, and we'll see here shortly why even that may be a bit of a misnomer. Okay, so first things first, to pack this much punch, you're going to need some room. The 5X is significantly larger than its older brothers, measuring approximately 6¼ inches long, 3 3/8 wide, and 1 1/4 inch tall. If none of that means anything to you, here it is with the 2X Pro resting on top for scale. Or if you've never seen the Pro in person, here's the SN30, essentially a Super Nintendo controller, for comparison. Most of your familiar friends line the back of the device, including the mini USB for power, full-sized HDMI port, your RCA jacks for composite component and audio, and then S-Video on the far right. We do have one new addition on the left-hand side of the device, SCART input. Now this is a nice addition that gives us all of the previous types of connections bundled together on one device. Now I could regurgitate the specs for you on each of these connection types, but it's probably easier and less boring if I just flash the graphic from the user manual for you. There's also a bit of a spoiler here for you regarding latency, but well, you already know Mike isn't peddling garbage out onto the market. I mean, what did Eminem say? You ain't even impressed no more? You're used to it? On the front of the device, we have the menu button, which will trigger an on-screen display and allow you to cycle through a list of features for the device. The option button then cycles through each available choice from the device's features. More simply, you can think of it this way. The menu button takes you through topics, and then the option button cycles through the settings available for each of those topics. And lastly, the input button does exactly what you probably think it does. It cycles through your various input connections to tell the device to use composite, SCART, component, etc. Oh, and another slick inclusion with the RetroTink 5X, a remote control. Yeah, we've really gotten big time now. This is another scenario where it's probably easiest for me to flash the manual's graphic. For those of you who are interested in this, you can see that this is a little more than just the one-to-one mapping of clicking the buttons on the actual unit. There are some specific commands mapped out to make full use of each of the remote's buttons. Alright, so here's where I'm going to pause for some real talk. My personal use cases for a scaler like this have diminished a little over the past year. Most of my consoles have either already been HDMI modded, or I've turned to an FPGA solution like an analog console or Mister. But I do have a few somewhat oddball scenarios where I'm grateful to have a device like this. So this is me basically saying to you that I'm leaving a lot of the heavy technical analysis to the My Life in Gaming and Retro RGBs of the world. They are far more experienced in those types of deeper dives than I am, But then that kind of opens the door for me to be a little different with this. Alright, a lot of you already know what's coming up first here. I'm going to hook up my consoleized MVS board to the RetroTink 5X via component output. For simplicity's sake, I'll cycle through some of the output options here for you on screen before switching over to a direct capture. And look at this final option here, 1440p. This is what I was referring to earlier as the misnomer. This is technically, I guess, 6x in this case, and it looks absolutely fantastic on my 4K television. This is real Neo Geo hardware running a real cartridge, and quite honestly, it looks like it's nearly the equivalent of something that's directly outputting digital, like the Mister. It's not quite as clean, there's some noise here, but think about what's happening, and this is damn impressive. This isn't emulation of any sort. You're looking at a gorgeous upscaling of OG hardware. And speaking of clean signals, there is a low-pass filter option you'll likely want to have engaged. It cleans up some noise in the signal that can have undesired effects and make the picture look much less appealing than when it's engaged. Mike says this is at the expense of some sharpness, and I'll certainly trust him on that, but this still looks pretty great to me. This is also probably a good time to mention that the analog to digital converter and polyphase scaler work together to yield a few horizontal sampling choices for you. You have your generic 4:3 and 16:9 options for this, but also console-specific modes built into the device, including one for Neo Geo. Now, I'm borrowing heavily from Mike's own words here, but he states that these are the optimal settings for each system as they sample the horizontal direction at the same rate as the original console. The onboard FPGA then automatically interpolates and selects the best phase for the sharpest possible output. It's automatic and it's built in, people. Well, this is a crowning achievement in scaling and the first of two of the largest, most amazing features that Mike has implemented into the device. Oh, you of course also have options for scan lines if you'd like to use those. I found the 50% setting to be pretty nice, and the picture seems much brighter to me than when I used the scan line setting on the RetroTink Pro. Now, I don't have any hard data or even a comment from Mike to back that claim up, it's just anecdotal, but it definitely seems more tolerable to me, and as someone who doesn't even really like artificial scan lines, I still caught myself playing with them turned on from time to time. I know I mentioned sharp output, but I did want to take a moment and also mention you do still have the option to set interpolation to soft. Now, this is personal preference, of course, but in general, 3D games tend to look better with soft as opposed to sharp. Do you guys see what I mean here? There are so many settings to pour over. You could easily do a 1-hour special on this thing. I think it's really important to note, though, that this is kind of the real beauty of the device. It's very unassuming when you're looking at it. I mean, it's literally a black box with 3 buttons on it. But under the hood, you can then dive a little deeper and really squeeze some extra quality and customization out of this. So in other words, I'm saying it can be as simple or as detailed as you want it to be. It's super easy to use, but yet there are layers here for you to go into if you want to. I haven't even finished going through all of the options yet, but I need to move on to my next use case. Alright, so this is also a sneak peek at an upcoming video, kind of a crossover shared universe thing going on here. This is AxunWorks Jamma Extractor, version 2.0 I might add. We'll talk more about this very soon, but for today, all you need to know is that this goes between a Jamma harness and a PCB and has the ability to extract AV and control signals. Today, I'm going to use the SCART connector on it to run to the RetroTink 5X for some gorgeous upscaled captures of real arcade boards. So obviously, if you're a purist and you are hell-bent on having actual arcade captures in your videos, this is a killer setup. This would also be highly ideal, maybe even the best balance of quality versus ease of use for live streaming arcade games from actual machines. This is really exciting stuff that is surprisingly convenient and just so easy to use. When I first got my Astro City cabinet a few years back, I really wished I had something that could have done this. Chances are I may have actually gotten more into arcade streaming had this setup existed back then. And dare I say, this might be the world first ever pairing of the Jamma Extractor 2.0 and the RetroTink 5X. It certainly isn't going to be the last. I would bet in the next several months you'll see some arcade streamers switch to this setup, as well as have new people pop up because of these two devices. As a side note, for those wondering, I am able to grab both audio and video over SCART with this setup. Alright, we've seen a consoleized Neo Geo board and then actual arcade hardware used with the 5X. My last actual real-life use case for Mike's Wonderbox is a little bit more traditional, and that would be using it with my Panasonic 3DO. My 3DO is stock with no mods, so it only has the S-Video output. But that's okay, since it will show us what that looks like compared to the previous component and SCART inputs that we just looked at. This will also give me a chance to talk briefly about another standout feature of the 5X, and that's the motion adaptive de-interlacing algorithm that the device contains. The 3DO natively outputs 480i video, making it an ideal customer for such a feature. This algorithm analyzes video on a pixel by pixel basis. Yes, I know how crazy that is. To then determine what de-interlacing method, bob, weave, or blend to use based on the content that you're feeding it. I'll just pause and let that sink in for a little bit, because if your mind is blown, that's totally normal right now. But even if that doesn't make sense to you, the takeaway is that the 5X, when set to motion adaptive de-interlacing, is going to make the best choice for you in order to deliver gorgeous output that adds no lag or flicker to your content. You can, of course, still manually change your de-interlacing method if you think you're smarter than Mike. So here again is that whole concept of allowing the device to work for you optimally out of the box, or getting down and dirty and tweaking things yourself. It's as easy or as robust as you want it to be. It's simple, yet complex at the same time. Using the S-Video with the 3DO, this is also a prime opportunity for me to call out the YC filter option, which can be set to either 4-line comb or notch. As Mike notes, the 4-line comb option generally produces the best results, but for some consoles which are off-spec, like the Sega Genesis, notch may look a little better. My experiences concur with Mike, and I've pretty much left this set to 4-line comb. This is also a good time to talk about vertical sync, as there are two options here for that. You have a triple buffer mode and a frame lock mode. Now, as someone who doesn't typically venture into the consoles that are heavily affected by this, my best assessment based on some limited testing is that triple buffer is going to give you the most compatibility with devices and eliminates the sync loss and drops during resolution changes that you may have experienced in the past. But it does come with a slight increase in lag due to repeating or dropping frames while pushing a constant 60 frames per second. So again, this setting will be critical to those using systems like the Saturn and PS2, where certain titles switch between 240p and 480i, and you may have experienced cutouts with other scalers. With the 5X, those woes are a thing of the past. Your other option, frame lock, will come with reduced lag of about 1/4 of a frame, and it will use your console as the base clock. This is also why you may have some issues getting things to sync up with different TVs and capture cards though. And in the event of that happening, you could just switch over to triple buffer. So in short, I use frame lock when possible, and if I can't get things to sync up, I switch over to triple buffer. I should note that I haven't had any issues with frame lock on my TCL television with any of my consoles, but when I've introduced the Elgato capture card, I have had some compatibility problems and have had to switch to triple buffer for sanity purposes. So that is the RetroTink 5X, and wow, is it ever a beauty of a device. Now, my use cases are probably a bit stranger than most people's, but it really does everything that I would want it to, and I have to think it will cover 95% of most gamers' needs out there. Again, I know I keep repeating this, but the real genius for me in this unit is how simply complex it is. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's so true. It's a powerful box that can be turn on and forget, or if you want to be fancy, you can dig through the various settings and customize what it's doing for you. It's simply complex. Final thoughts here. There are some options I didn't dig into, like color space and the light gun border. The latter I have no experience with because I don't own a Sinden light gun. But the final feature, which I also didn't get a chance to test, and really there's only so much I can do here, and my backlog for both videos and games is immense right now, so cut me a break. There is an experimental feature allowing you to downscale 480i, 480p, and 720p sources to 240p. There is also a big red warning in the manual about potentially damaging your unit if you don't know what you're doing, and there's currently no support or guarantee around this experimental feature. That also reminds me, I will not be your personal support for that feature or anything that I have discussed here. I simply can't be a one-man help desk for the masses, but I would encourage you to head over to the VideoGamePerfection Forums, as I'm certain conversations will spin up there and you'll have access to a lot more minds and users to help you troubleshoot. So don't email or DM the old Joe with support questions. I'm honestly not going to be available to assist you with any of that. Put all that disclaimer stuff out of the way. This is an awesome device that will no doubt continue to see updates through firmware the way all of Mike's products have. I have seen with my own eyes over the past month or so how unbelievably amazing this scaler is to use and to look at. I trust that anyone who picks this up will not be disappointed with the results or performance. This is truly the mastermind's masterpiece, simply complex.